be here. Okay, so I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of go over what's going to be on the first quiz. So I'm going to ask you all to kind of hold your questions to the end. This is a 30-question quiz. You'll have 60 minutes to complete it. It's due by the end of the day on Friday. Make sure you look at the study guide that's posted in module 1, or the first week module. And then I also have it here brought up. And what you're going to want to do is, as I talk, or if you haven't done so already, start filling out some of the things associated with it. So let's go ahead and get right to it. I don't want to keep you all longer from anything you're doing. We'll do this kind of standard before each exam. We'll meet on the office hours that I have, and then we can go over the questions on the test, and then I can answer any questions that you may have. So what I'm going to want you to know is, remember a little bit about direct democracy and some of the criteria that's involved in getting either a petition signed, or getting taxes put into place, or getting some type of vote passed. So remember, this is very simple. For a statute, an initiative that is a statute that makes a new law, you need 5% of the population that voted in the last gubernatorial election. All right, so that's for a statute. For a constitutional amendment to the California Constitution, you need 8%. So remember, 5 for a initiative or a statute, 8 for an amendment to the California Constitution. Okay, be able to define what elite theory is. Remember, elite theory primarily focuses on the masses and the relationship with the elites, in that the masses tend to be passive, apathetic, and ill-informed. And the elites are going to be the few with power, the values that they hold, the behaviors that they do, and their demographics. All right. And you're going to understand a little bit more about demographics when we get to chapter 6 of the Irony book, which is about, a couple of weeks in the future. Remember that the masses are going to be passive, apathetic, and ill-informed. That's something that the author in the Irony book really kind of puts into place, and really tries to kind of characterize the masses. We don't want to get involved. We don't want to talk. We don't want to have our voices heard. So therefore, that's why the elites stay in power. Know what pluralism is. Remember, pluralism is that system of government where many groups can kind of compromise and bargain for things that might affect them as far as public policy. So in a pluralist system, we would get, all these different groups together and have them compromise and bargain to get what they want. Remember, during colonial times, if we're looking at the next one, who was able to vote? Simple, white men with property. And kind of going into that, look at the different types of colonies prior to the revolution. I don't expect you to know each individual colony that was associated with these different types of colony. Just know the generalities of what a proprietary colony is, what a royal colony is, and a charter colony. A charter colony was kind of the basis for the Constitution. I want you to remember that as well. Defining democracy. How would we define democracy? How would you classify democracy? And it's a very kind of interesting thing to ponder when, we all have different ideas about what democracy is, but I think the best definition is government by the people. We go into that whole government by the people, for the people, so on and so on, right? Don't worry about free soil and absolution. We're not going to get into that. Edmund Burke talked about something called salutary neglect, or a healthy neglect. It's kind of characterizing kind of the way the British Crown was enforcing laws on the colonies prior to some of the acts that they put into place. It was kind of an out of sight, out of mind, and some of the colonies acted, or the colonies in a sense weren't really as focused on until the English Crown wanted to help start paying debt off incurred by the French and Indian War. Then we started to see a bunch of taxation in that. But prior to all those taxations that were put into place, enforcement of laws and stuff over the colonies was rather lax. Know what a social contract is, and it's pretty simple. A social contract is something where we give up rights, and in turn, the government will protect our life, liberty, and property. So we consent to government rule, and in turn, the government will protect our life, liberty, and property. Know some of the acts that were imposed on the colonies that upset them. The Stamp Act, the Tea Act, the Currency Act, a lot of these things that were put into place that really upset the colonists. They, the whole classic no taxation without representation. Note the natural rights that Locke talked about. We're all entitled to life, liberty, and property, kind of a precursor to what Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence when he said we're entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So don't get tripped up on this question. All right, so remember, it's life, liberty, and property according to Locke. Tyranny of the majority. You remember what tyranny of the majority is? Something that Madison was afraid of, kind of the impetus of putting in the separation of powers doctrine, where we did not want one institution of government to be more powerful than the other. Because in a sense, you also have to have that system of checks and balances. So the rights of the minority are going to be protected. And, it's not always, we primarily run off a majority rule system, but we also have to respect the rights of the minority. And we're not talking about ethnic minority. We're talking about people that are in, that 49% and below category where we, majority rule is 51%. The whole concept of tyranny of the majority is to prevent the minority or the people in the 49%'s rights from being violated. The irony of the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal unless you are a slave, unless you're a woman. So, kind of the irony about that. Remember one of our first governing documents was the Articles of Confederation. Know the weaknesses in it, and it's detailed on one of the slides. No executive or judicial branches, state governments were weak, and the federal government, federal government didn't have power to tax or regulate trade, and those are big revenue generators, right? So that kind of was one of the reasons that, they found these defects in the Articles of Confederation, and in turn decided, instead of revising those defects, they decided to write a whole new constitution. Know what the New Jersey plan was. Remember, the New Jersey plan was a plan where each state would have one vote, and there was to be a judicial branch and executive branch. The Virginia plan was kind of like English Parliament, where you had the idea of representation to be a system where you have the House chosen by the population, and then that House will choose the Senate, kind of analogous to what English Parliament is, where you have the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and the House of Commons elects the House of Lords. So we kind of went away for that, and there was the Parliament also oversees the judicial branch and the legislative and the executive branch. Actually, when we talk about English Parliament, and some of you may know this from kind of world news and stuff, England has a prime minister, which is actually chosen by Parliament, and he's, he or she can be kind of subservient to Parliament and try to make them happy. Out of all this, we got the Connecticut Compromise, where there was a compromise made where we have a House of Representatives that is elected by the population. At that time, state legislatures would elect the Senate, and then we would have a separate judiciary, executive, and legislative branch. Know how the Constitution addressed slavery, the Three-Fifths Compromise. No slave trade, no banning the slave trade prior to 1808, and the Constitution also required the return of escaped or runaway slaves. Know the system of checks and balances. Sometimes we have consequences with the system of checks and balances. Sometimes it's hard to get things done in this system. And checks and balances are designed to make majority rule difficult, if not at times possible, as long as it doesn't interfere with the right of the minority. All right. So something I really want to hammer into you is that we have majority rule, but there has to be protections for the minority. Know the different checks, like checks on the executive branch. The executive branch can be checked by the legislative branch. If the executive branch issues a veto, the legislative branch can override that veto. If the executive branch passes an executive order, the court system can determine whether or not that law is constitutional. Know that the president can veto the legislative branch. That's a check. If the legislative branch decides to pass a law and it's challenged in the court, then the court system has the ability to determine whether or not that law is constitutional. Checks on the executive branch, the executive branch kind of gave them the power to determine whether a law is constitutional or not through the court case in Marbury versus Madison. And that kind of gave themselves the ultimate power to determine whether or not a law is constitutional. And the reason that it's kind of important is that in order to check the judicial branch, you need a constitutional amendment, right? If the judicial branch determines something to be unconstitutional, then a constitutional amendment can be passed. But that's something that's very difficult, where you need 2/3 of the state, as well as 3/4 of 2/3 of Congress, as well as 3/4 of the states to determine whether or not a law is constitutional. To pass a constitutional amendment, sorry. So let me back up and say that one more time. For a constitutional amendment to be passed, you need 2/3 of Congress to agree to pass an amendment. And you know how it's hard enough that we get 51%, right? And then you also need 3/4 of the state, or 38 states out of the 50, to approve a constitutional amendment. Like I said, no tyranny of the minority, tyranny of the majority. Know the term popular sovereignty and how that's how we kind of view kind of the way we look at democracy. Popular sovereignty, how things should be ran, and kind of going along with that social contract, kind of looking at the fact that we need a system that could be fair, even though we kind of see some hiccups and some unfairness in this in some of the acts of Congress or the acts of the Supreme Court, but just kind of know what we mean by popular sovereignty. I'm going to go ahead and ask if you have any questions right now. We'll still go over a couple more, but I wanted to see if you had any questions. Either hop on mic or type it in the chat. Okay. Know what popular consent is. Consent, the idea that government must derive its powers from the people it governs. We consent to being ruled, right? We talked about the social contract. Sometimes checks and balances can create hiccups and create roadblocks. Sometimes it can stall legislation. That might be a consequence. And kind of when we talk about elitism and the consensus among the founders is that we have to have a protection of individual liberty. And that's kind of where we have the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are put in place to protect us from the government and to protect our rights from the government. And government can be a threat to individual liberty. And that, like I said, that's one of the reasons why the first 10 amendments were put in place, because it's a threat to liberty, a threat to freedom, and so on. I think I forgot to, on this first one, remember to start a tax in California. Yeah, I forgot to go over that one. To start a tax in California, to raise a tax or to lower a tax, you need 66% of the legislature to agree to that. No, in a democracy, we need equality before the law, equality of opportunity, and one person, one vote. That's what makes our whole system legitimate. Yes, Marbury versus Madison gives the power of the judicial branch to review legislation to determine whether or not it's constitutional. We can go ahead and go over the New Jersey plan again. Remember, the New Jersey plan basically says that was an idea from the state of New Jersey that created a one vote per state type of legislature. The Virginia plan called for something like English Parliament, where you would have the House of Representatives and the Senate, but the House of Representatives would be chosen by population, and the House of Representatives would be, the Senate would be chosen by the House of Representatives. There'd be no judicial or executive branch. And the Connecticut plan kind of consolidated those two together and made the system of government that we have now, where we have the House, which is determined by population. And then we have the Senate at that time was chosen by the House. And then we have an independent executive branch, an independent judicial branch, and an independent legislative branch, all supposed to have the same power. But there's been some instances, and I don't want to get it into too much until after we take this quiz. There's some instances where a branch of government has kind of evolved over time to be a little bit more powerful. But for the purpose of this exam, please focus on the fact that they're supposed to be equal. Don't worry about what I'm saying right now as far as how one's evolved. All right, I don't want to lead you to down the wrong path. No Prop 13. Also remember, Prop 13 limited property tax to 1% of the assessed value of the home. So we pay property tax 2 times a year, and you pay it to the county if you own any type of property, and it's 1% of your value of your home. So when you bought your home, and you say you bought it for $300,000, your property tax is going to be $3,000 a year, and you pay one installment in April and one in December. You can all pay it up front, but sometimes people also have it in their mortgage. So a bunch of different ways to get it paid. But yeah, watch the Prop 13 video again. It's pretty interesting. Also, one quick thing I want you to all focus on too is the 10th Amendment. Remember, in the 10th Amendment, along with the Supremacy Clause basically says that laws of Congress and federal laws outweigh state laws. So anytime we have a federal law and a state law conflict, federal law will take precedent or take superiority over it. So say, for instance, cannabis for recreational purposes is legal here in California. That was done by a democratically adopted initiative that we had here in California. But since cannabis is still a Schedule I narcotic, hypothetically, the federal government can come in and shut down all the dispensaries. All right. And there would be no recourse for these growers and these store owners, because it's still illegal under federal law. The federal government just hasn't enforced it. And you can pass any law according to the 10th Amendment, and we'll get more into this when we talk about federalism, but you can get past any law as long as it doesn't conflict with the powers of Congress or doesn't violate constitutional rights. All right. Are there any questions? You can either type it in the chat or hop on the mic.
Yeah, and we can find the study guide in Canvas, correct?
Right. It should be under the week 1 module.
Week 1 module, okay.
Yeah.
Just want to double check. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll go ahead and stop the recording. I'll post this. Give me like half an hour. It takes a little bit of time to archive and to upload, and then you can go over it later. If there's any questions between now and Friday, definitely let me know. I usually will go over the exam on Saturday to see if there's any questions that might have not come out the way I wanted to. So if there's something kind of wonky that you see, don't worry, I'll go over it. And if need be, I'll throw out the question. All right, it's not a promise, it's just something that I usually do.
I do have a question about the essay on the 7th.
Yeah.
Checks and balances. Are we gonna go more about checks and balances, or is that kind of already?
Yeah, we there's a video posted,
Okay.
and then also use the slides that I have on the PowerPoints. And then you can also bring in outside resources as well if you need to. Just find 5 checks and balances. There's going to be more than 5, but find 5 checks. Like for instance, the veto is a check, overriding the veto is a check. Judicial review, which is where the courts determine whether or not a law is constitutional, that's a check. A constitutional amendment is a check. The president nominating somebody and Congress confirming them is a check. Impeachment's a check. So just pick out 5 checks. Tell me where they're derived from. Right? Are they derived from a constitution? Are they derived from a law? Are they derived from a Supreme Court decision? And then give me an example. So if we want to talk about impeachment, impeachment is where Congress can impeach the president. The House will bring articles of impeachment. The Senate will act as the jury. This is in the Constitution. And a good example would be, Trump getting impeached twice in his presidency, and just kind of the reasons why he was impeached. And just do that for each check.
Awesome. Thank you.
No worries. And if you need help, and if there's any type of aid or any type of help that you need, and anybody here, just let me know, and then we can schedule a quick Zoom session to go over anything that might be need to be answered. Any other questions? The videos are working okay, right? Everything's fine with that?
So far, yes.
Okay, perfect. Do we have any other questions, concerns, or comments?
For the quiz, we have one time that we can take it, correct?
Right, but if there's an instance where, you may not do so well, I can give the opportunity to do test corrections.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but you guys are all going to do well, so we won't talk about that. But if need be, we can do that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Could I possibly meet with you after this?
Yes.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah. Any other questions, concerns, or comments? All right, everybody, thank you for coming. We'll do this again. Remember, I'm going to be here every Wednesday from 6:30 to 7:30. So just click on that link in the module section. And between now and Friday, or now and when the papers due, if you have any questions, by all means, get in contact with me and we can schedule some type of Zoom session. All right. Speak now, forever hold your peace.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, I'll see you later. Take it easy.